Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for gathering here and making your way through the construction. I'm Lisa Castanar, and I'm actually team leader of a new global diversity reporting team at Bloomberg News. For those of you who don't know that much about Bloomberg, we have about 2,500 journalists around the world in 150 bureaus in 72 countries. So we're a very big news organization. We really focus on government economics and finance, as you know, as well as our B&A arm, which is our host today. And one thing that we really are trying to do is make sure that the diversity conversation as a business imperative is part of all of the news coverage that we do. So we're not separating out diversity as a topic. We do have some senior reporters who work with people around the world to tease out, what's really going on with this huge smashing together of very rapid social change that we're seeing all around us and the way organizations work. So today's discussion is around law firms, of course, although I think a lot of these messages are very relevant to many different kinds of industries and different kinds of businesses. I'm not going to go into big long explainers of our fantastic panel. I'm just going to introduce you briefly to who we have speaking, and their bios are in your program. Tony West is stuck in traffic. He's on his way, so we'll have him join us at some point in the next half hour, I think. First, Ellen. Ellen Moran Dwyer is a managing partner at Crowell and Moran. Then next to her we have Jim McNasby, who's the general counsel of Marsh, Inc., and we have Richard Rosenbaum, the CEO of Greenberg, Traurig. And they are all, obviously represent different wings of the industry in which you work, some corporate, some bigger companies, some in smaller companies. So I think it's great to have this combination of people to speak about these issues. So the other thing is, I know the name of this discussion is the business imperative. We're not going to spend too much time on the business imperative because I think that we can go through all the reasons why it makes good sense to have a more diverse crowd in your law firm or to be paying attention to diversity. And what we really need to discuss is the barriers to making it happen. So Ellen, I'm going to start with you. You've worked a lot on issues of women in the profession. And from where we are now, I'd love you to sort of give us a bit of an outline of where you see the barriers are for advancing the numbers with regard to women in the law. You're an employment lawyer, so you have some perspective also on how companies work and where those two things come together.
Sure. So I guess I'd broaden it out a little bit beyond women to just sort of women and minorities generally. And I mean, one of the things we talked about in getting ready for this was sort of what are the barriers? We do know what the business case is. It's been around for 10 years. There's been a call to action. There's been all sorts of commitments by our clients and by law firm leaders to really try to enhance the opportunities for women and diverse people in our organizations. And I think, in the barrier front, what I see, it's a very basic thing. I mean, it's interesting to see, we have our general counsel who are, again, signing up to calls to action, who are communicating in an aspirational way that they value diversity. And on the other side, we have law firms who are investing in tremendous amount of time and effort and money in creating, we have diversity professionals, we have massive amounts of infrastructure now so that we can report to our clients on how many diverse lawyers we have, how many women, at what level, how many hours are they spending on their matters, and notwithstanding all of that effort, not a lot of forward progress. And so one of my perspectives on that is that what's missing really, and part of the barrier is relationships. I think that it's not realistic, we've seen this, to think that our clients are going to sever their relationships with law firms that they've done business with, and white men, God bless you, for many, many years, right? They're just not going to do that in a moment. And I think on the law firm side, again, it's about, we heard Lisa talk earlier today about performance being, working hard, hours, all that. It really is about trying to create opportunities for clients and diverse lawyers in our organizations to build relationships with each other, because that is actually how business is done. And so that's, one of the things that I've worked on both internally at my firm through sponsorship initiatives and otherwise. I'm on the board of an organization called the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, and one of the things that we've worked very hard on, and the sort of incremental success so far, is creating opportunities for diverse professionals from major companies and from law firms to come together, to network with each other, to spend time with each other in a very purposeful way. People are coming together in an environment where they know why they're there. They're there to get to know in-house lawyers so that they will get to know them and develop trust and confidence in them, and that the in-house lawyers will give them business. And I can say from a law firm perspective, business is very important to success and progression in our organizations. It just is. And so that's sort of one example of something that's happening. But I think, in a word, for me, the principal barrier to sort of enhancement of the diversity of our profession is the lack of connectivity and relationships between our diverse lawyers and our clients.
Wow, Richard, you were telling me about how, when your firm started in Florida in 1967, it was diverse to be Jewish. And now, and then when you moved there in 1985, it was still difficult for you to go to a meeting at the Fort Lauderdale Yacht Club because they asked you to not, let them know your name. So tell me about relationships as you see it now. You run a firm that is diverse, has a lot of senior leaders who have come through the firm and are increasingly representing all kinds of different groups. How does it work with them and the relationships in the community, and how does that bring you business?
Well, thank you. I think that for us, and I think in general in the profession, it's kind of interesting that it's been so many years that we've all been talking about this. That's kind of interesting. How long have we been talking about these issues? I won't tell you how old I am because I hate saying it, but it seems like most of my life, we've been talking about women and people of color and more recently the LGBT community, et cetera. And at our firm, it's never been an issue, really. We were started as an alternative to a city, which it's hard to believe that Miami was all white males when you go there today, but it was. And the firms, I'm happy to say, that I'm talking about, you never heard of, because they no longer exist. When the Cuban immigration began and they came to Greenberg, Traurig, and we had the only Hispanic leader of any major law firm in the United States, Cesar Alvarez, who became a well-known figure, and he's still in the firm. He's the chairman of the firm. We have 65 women who are managing shareholders or practice leaders. We have the co-president of the firm is Hillary Bass, who's going to be the head of the ABA. The head of our global corporate department is a Latina. I could go on and on. The other co-president is an African American, the head of our Atlanta office. He was the only black and the only lawyer who was ever the head of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And I'm going to stop there for a minute because, when I went to law school, I went at night. It's a long story, but today, a lot of women, a lot of people of color in law school, a lot of them coming in the early, entry level. The issue is, are there people at the leadership level? Are there people there as role models and mentors? And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Are the clients demanding it? And I think they are, more and more. And that's where change is going to occur, is when, not because there are rules, not because there are laws, but because the culture changes.
So within your firm, which had a real you know, has had more diversity perhaps than your peer firms for longer. How has that brought you business? I mean, when you talk about the relationships that these people have with clients or with potential clients, can you address that a little bit more?
Well, when a client comes in and you understand who they are, and first of all, you understand their language. Second of all, you understand their values and what makes them tick, and they feel like you. I think that they feel like you understand them, and that you are going to represent their interests because you understand their interests. Remember, none of us are here to create social change. We're a business.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's also very important, for example, some of the issues that arise with women, sometimes with men, are family care. And at the end of the day, is the person being responsible? Is the client being satisfied? And because if that's not happening, doesn't matter what we think.
Right. Jim, let me ask you, when we talk about this structure, as Richard was saying, of course, when you have a diverse firm that is working in that way, it's great for business. But, you know, I think the number of women coming out of law school is now about half. There isn't that much movement in terms of people of color and others in terms of the numbers who are moving up. What can you do at a firm like Marsh to really invigorate the discussion and help those people become leaders in the long run?
It's a great question. You know, a couple of things I'd observe. At Marsh, our legal department actually consists of more women than men. So we're about 55-45 in terms of percent. So that feels like at least one credential I can share. And there are actually more women employed at Marsh than men overall. The problem that both the company has and the legal department to a lesser extent is that there isn't visible leadership among women and people of color. And so the law department or the legal department is actually in a pretty good position there. You know, the general counsel, Marsh is one of 4 operating companies at Marsh & McLennan Companies, Inc., and I'm the general counsel of Marsh, but the general counsel of Guy Carpenter, until just recently, was a woman, the general counsel of Mercer was a woman, and the general counsel of Oliver Wyman is a woman. So we have good representation at the leadership, but if you look across the rest of the enterprise, there's a dearth of leadership among women, and we're akin to a law firm in the sense that we have clients who are in insurance brokerage. So we have a service model, and we have to get clients just like a law firm does. So that's where we stand. And if I could just add one quick thing to how I met Richard, if I can say this. So I'm the LGBT executive sponsor for Marsh and the Disability Group member 2. And I went to a program run by a different organization on diversity, specifically targeting the LGBT community. And Richard was a panelist there and an ally, and his firm made a significant commitment to diversity. So I, sitting in the audience, took it upon myself to call up Richard, introduce myself, and invite myself to his place to hear about what his firm does. And if you know, that is such a different model from the way that general counsels usually approach law firms. I mean, I was thinking when I got up here, look, I'm surrounded. So, you know, there's usually a focus of firms trying to get business. It's sort of incumbent on a general counsel or other type of in-house person to say, I recognize your commitment to the initiative, and this is what I'm going to do in response to your commitment, because otherwise it's just an empty, principled commitment and not a practical one.
Thank you. Let me introduce Tony West, the General Counsel of PepsiCo. How's that? I'm sorry, you were stuck in traffic?
I'm going to pretend like I've been here the whole time, actually.
Right. So I'm going to leap in.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you, related to what Ellen was originally talking about with regard to relationships. I read a speech that you gave about the apprenticeship that referred to this being a profession with an apprenticeship culture. Mm-hmm. And as a person of color, as someone who has been very involved with making sure that you help elevate other people in the Black community in the legal profession. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to, what your strategies are in terms of making that work? We're talking here about relationships with each other as lawyers, relationships with clients, to try and really boost this whole diversity conversation.
Well, I mean, I think it starts, you know, in some ways it's not, there's no rocket science to it, right? You have to be very deliberate, you have to be very mindful. As you think about the different aspects of your role, wherever you happen to be, you always want to look for opportunities to advance the ball and to bring diversity into the profession. I think, you know, that was certainly my experience as a young lawyer. I had people reach out to me and sort of give me opportunities to learn and to grow. And you know, one of the things I often tell people is that your mentors do not have to look like you. Your sponsors do not necessarily have to look like you. You have to just make sure you are that you're learning from someone, working with someone who has a lot to teach you, has a lot to share, is willing to give you the opportunity to really stretch. And so I think, you know, for me, when I think about just in the time that I've been the GC, and this week is my 1-year anniversary, by the way.
Congratulations.
Let's see where we are in a year from now. You know, one of the things, this has also been top of mind for me. So we've done two things. One is I've had the opportunity to hire or promote 5 people. 4 of the 5 are women, and all of them are women of color, which tells me that it's not a question of lack of talent or dearth of talent. It's about being deliberate in the way you focus and you do your outreach. The other thing I did, and Jim, you were talking about this a little bit, right? About how when it comes to outside counsel, you know, we've been really deliberate about telling outside counsel that we want to hire folks who reflect our values, and key among those are diversity values. And so earlier this year we sent out this survey to all of our top outside counsel and said, look, you know, we want to understand not only how are you staffing PepsiCo matters, but how are you doing in diversifying your own law firms to diversify the profession. And those are important metrics to us. That's an important dialogue and conversation to us as we make, you know, decisions about who we would like to represent us in court.
So on the other side, the receivers of that letter, how have they responded?
Very positively.
I did see the
yeah,
letter.
Very positively. I think firms are really welcoming this opportunity too. I think it helps when a client can say, this is an important thing to us. We would like to see this in terms of our relationship. We want to have diverse teams staffing our case. And we've talked about, you know, it's the business imperative for diversity. It's no secret that's what the consumer market looks like.
Right.
I mean, when you look at our customers, when you look at the markets we're in, it's a business imperative for that to be the case.
So let me ask both Ellen and Richard, have you received any letters like that from clients saying we want to know how diverse you are in order to keep doing business with you?
So we've received lots of those letters and survey questionnaires. And I think, you know, the issue really is what are our clients prepared to do? Really, I think that's ultimately, right? There are cynics among us who say, yes, you know, it's another survey. Yes, we'll provide metrics. We've got all manner, actually, of technology and software that exists in our firms to measure our diversity, both in terms of numbers of women and minorities. So that exists. And I would say, as the recipient of those questionnaires and surveys and all the people now that are hired to deal with that and manage that information, you know, it's sort of the question then becomes, what impact will that have? If the statistics and the metrics are positive, what impact will that have on the willingness of our clients to send business to us? That's really where the rubber meets the road, you know, and in the relationship between clients and law firms. And I think there's a lot to be done on both sides to maybe modify some of the cynicism that has grown over the last 10 years, which is, yes, we're spending all this time, we're filling out every survey, we're actually proud of our numbers, we think they're great, look at these women, we promote someone, we tell our clients, you know, all of that, but they're not, you know, I think a number of law firms feel that it's an aspirational thing that our general counsel clients like to speak about, but perhaps, you know, less kind of on the ground, sending work to the diverse lawyers in our law firms. And so we're working on that, which is really trying to foster, again, back to my relationship point, right? Having our diverse lawyers actually meeting, you know, clients who value that and putting themselves in a better position to actually receive work. I'm not aware of a general counsel, you know, who's made the decision to send work to a law firm not knowing any of the partners or the people to whom they are sending the work. They're going to send the work because they have confidence in the organization and they have relationships with the lawyers that they want to send the work to.
So I want to follow up with you, Tony, on exactly this, which is that does Pepsi then look at the results and say, okay, well, they're you know, and as somebody who's, I've worked in the women's space quite a lot, are you willing to say, well, maybe we'll give people a little extra time because we know they have so many working mom lawyers there who can't deliver it by midnight tonight, but might need till midnight tomorrow? I mean, are those kind of nitty-gritty conversations actually happening? Because otherwise it seems a little bit pie in the sky.
Yeah, no, I think the answer is yeah. I mean, certainly, I think you heard from Kelly Tullier earlier, who talked, everything she said I think is right. So I associate myself with her remarks. But you know, in my tenure, I think it's, you know, less of a question of you know, are we going to give someone work, and it's going to depend on whether or not they can get it back to us by midnight. I actually think it's even a step back, which is simply making the decision to engage a firm in a major way, to begin a relationship. I think the relationship point is really important. And in fact, you know, one of the first things I did when I came in was to say, look, I know that we have long-standing relationships with firms X, Y, Z. You know, I basically pulled the list of the 30 top law firms that we give business to every year. And I didn't want to suggest that I was going to disrupt all of those relationships, because there's some important long-standing relationships. There are obviously ongoing matters you have to be responsible in that way. But what I said to my team was I didn't want us to default into simply re-engaging the same law firm simply because we had. I really wanted us to be deliberate about that decision, and part of that deliberation is the value that you're getting. Part of the deliberation is the quality of work that you're getting. But part of that deliberation has to be, what do the teams who are working on our matters look like? What does the firm look like? What's the firm's commitment to these issues? And we have made real business decisions about who we're engaging based on those metrics. And so, you know, I think, and we'll continue to do that. And I, you know, I'm fairly upfront about that with outside counsel. And so, so I guess I don't, you know, I think you're always going to have the push and pull. It's an interesting point, though, about how you get the work actually assigned, because I was actually having this conversation 2 days ago with one of the outside counsel who does quite well in the diversity metrics and to whom we give work, quite a bit of work. And he was actually saying he's the managing partner, he's going to change the way work is assigned within the firm to ensure that they can sort of manage for the, you know, all of the, whether it's the different circumstances or what have you, to make sure that, you know, a much broader and diverse array of talent is getting exposure to the work that they ought to be getting to advance their career. So that's actually, I think, a real issue of how firms do that internally.
Well, it sounds like the conversation. Sorry, Richard, go ahead.
I would just say, you know, we've been at this a long time, and I think at this point, on this issue, and you know, you mentioned the Out in the Law event, and I was the chair of that. The LGBT community has become much more active in as well, and much more openly involved in these things. And I won't digress on that, but that's another area that we've paid a lot of attention to. And have a number of leaders in, but the issue is excellence is expected, value is expected, and none of this is an exception to that. This is in addition to that. But if you can deliver those things that every client expects and have a diverse workforce as part of your culture, I think that clients want that and they expect that. The big change over the last few years is maybe the last 3-4 years, is more and more major clients are not just talking about it. They are making decisions. And I think some of the traditionally elite firms that have been, in many cases, the least responsive to diversity values, as a matter, they may talk about it, but just look at the numbers and look at the faces, and find out how many openly gay people are running their departments, and how many women are on their executive committees, and how many African Americans are running offices, and
those numbers are not great right now.
Yeah, but you know, so they can talk, but the faces don't lie.
Right.
And so, you know, those firms are starting to lose clients, and that is happening, and I know that because we've been a beneficiary.
Oh, that's fascinating. Jim, tell us, you have been very involved in both the LGBT community and the Parkinson's community, working with the Michael J. Fox Foundation and other places because of your having Parkinson's. But tell us about, you know, other kinds of more invisible forms of diversity that are perhaps, and how that plays into this issue of really needing to recognize that disabilities, for instance, are a form of diversity that needs also a boost. How does that,
Yeah,
do you?
I feel like now is when I say, hi, nice to meet you, I have Parkinson's disease. But the reason I am open about it is because it affects the way I sit in the chair, the way I move around, the way I walk, the way I speak, the way my face works. And so what I wind up doing, and it's just like the LGBT thing, is I grab the information and I define it for you. So you don't think I'm nervous, I'm not nervous at all, but I may be shaking, is the way to think about it, right? And what I've done in myself is I'm surprised, you know, I was made the general counsel of Marsh when I was 38, which was pretty young, to have a role like that. And I decided to just be out about it right away because of I didn't want people to define me. And the reaction you get from people is unbelievable. You know, from anybody who in the room, in the audience, is dealing with something much more serious than I am, might come to you for advice. And you can make something that, I always say, it's like turning a weakness into a strength, right? But it presents a problem because I can be very open about it when I'm in the hiring phase. But if you're in my shoes and you're outside counsel, how do you inject a personal discussion about your medical history and your spouse, and then say, can I have, business? They're thinking either you lack discretion or judgment on the one hand, or you're, strange, which is of course my problem. So it's, I just like to give the message on diversity that, diversity is so many things. It's, all the traditional things we think of here. Outside the U.S., it's less so, but I think no matter what position you're in, you can seize the diversity initiative yourself and make something of it, and it becomes a valuable part of your life then. So that'd be my message.
So one other thing I wanted to talk about, and then we'll have lots of time for questions, so please think up questions. We want to have a vibrant last 15 minutes of input from the audience. Is the issue, the one last thing I want to talk about with everybody is this issue of unconscious bias, which I think sort of connects a little bit with what you're talking about. People just aren't necessarily aware of how they're coming across in the most simple terms. I'm wondering if, there is something specific to the legal profession in terms of how the unconscious bias conversation is unfolding. Ellen, you had some thoughts about this. I know that there's a lot of training going on in these other kinds of things, but it seems to be part of the way that we can move forward is to recognize that the unconscious bias has to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there's anything unique to the legal profession. I can't really speak to that, but it's certainly something that's been a part of I think the dialogue for, I don't know, at least 5 years. And I think there's been different approaches, which is a lot of training and education, which I think is very important, and also very important in the sense that it's sort of empowering and not like, I think I mentioned this before, I think we live in this politically correct world, and where there's a lot of training, defensive training about, and I'm an employment lawyer, so I do some of this, but don't do this, don't do that, and it really is very inhibiting for human beings then, who really want to and must get to know people who are unlike them. But my experience has been that there's just a lot of fear and concern, and that sometimes can lead to avoidance, which is I don't want to say the wrong thing, and so I'm not going to engage the African American woman. I'm the white male. I have no idea what her life is like, and so I just you're attracted to the people who are just like you. And I think we've seen, certainly in law firms, that the best sponsorship, occurs between two people who are very similar, right? Who right out of the box relate to each other. They look the same. They've had the same background. That's a very natural thing. So I think that that unconscious bias is real. I think that, again, sort of my theme here today is that the best way that I've seen us sort of break it down and move beyond it is by folks really being willing to participate, by conducting themselves in a way with another person who's not like them, to try and start by saying, look, will you give me permission to get to know you better? I'm probably undoubtedly going to say things that may not be the right thing, that may make you uncomfortable, but I'm not going to get better at this unless I actually can learn from you and you can learn from me and we can get to know each other. I think that the trust issue really lies at the core of so many of the relationships that have to be built in order to propel women and diverse folks through our organizations, whether law firms or in-house. And absent that, absent someone really getting to know me and understanding sort of what my ambition is, and me giving them, the space to get close to me in the sense of really knowing what I want, they can't help me and I'm not going to progress. But it really is, I think, still a very, threatening world in some respects I see it with my more senior partners in particular, who would love to sponsor and try mightily, and they're always making mistakes, and then I hear about them from other people about, I said this wrong thing. I think we've got to find a way to move beyond that, right? To recognize kind of the good faith and the goodwill of people who are trying to make a difference. But to be a little forgiving about that, but also educating folks so that we can do it more seamlessly.
What are your... Oh, yeah, sure.
The only thing I want to add is the key to avoiding implicit or unconscious bias in any organization is if you have this man at the top, or you have an executive committee of a law firm. You take an executive committee of a law firm, big law firm, and you want to deal with this issue, but you look at the executive committee and it's a bunch of old white guys, you're not going to see what's going on.
Right.
So you have to have the right people that are in those positions, or you will never change it. And so that, to me, that's the key, is that you have the right people in leadership positions.
Right. Tony, what's your thinking about it's interesting because you said, you made it the point at the outset that your mentee, your sponsor, doesn't necessarily have to be someone like you, which is interesting because, I'm wondering if there should be more conversation about sort of cross-group communication. I mean, oftentimes I think probably in the gay community, they may say, okay, well, here's another LGBT person that you can model yourself after or learn from. But, maybe we need more white guys just being sponsors of all kinds of different people. What do you think?
I think it'll help everybody. I think, it's interesting. I think unconscious bias is real. I think, but I'm not sure I've ever been the one to be able to see it in the same way, right? Because obviously, people identify me as an African American, and so to the extent that there is unconscious bias in working or not, I mean, in some ways the world is the way it is. in the way that I find it. And so, I think that, I guess the thing I would say about it, but I think it's real because you see it operating on an institutional level, you see it operating in other ways, manifesting itself in other ways. But I think, one of the things that at least I think is true, because I see it not just with regard to race, I see it with regard to class. That's where I think it's probably, I see it more, or it will manifest itself more in my presence, is in terms of class discussions. My sense is that it's not, most times it's not motivated by animus. I mean, I really do think it's unconscious, right? I really do think it's not, it is a difference in experience. And so I think one of the things you got to be careful about is when you see unconscious bias sort of manifest itself, to be careful not to make judgments about the person from whom that is coming, about who they are, what their character is. I do think that inhibits the kind of conversation that's really kind of necessary to get past that. The other thing is just in the legal profession, I think so much of, we have come up in a profession which has had a very specific definition of merit. And that definition has historical roots which has traditionally excluded whole classes of people. So I think in many ways, just as lawyers, I do think that if you try to hold on to that merit standard, you will inevitably find yourself in situations where you're probably making unconscious judgments about who is or is not meeting that standard. And I find that when you're able to break out of that, whether it's about the law school someone went to, or the region of the country that they came from, or their ethnic or religious or other background, I think once you can sort of change your conception of what is meritorious and what is merit, I find that it's a lot easier to get past some of these issues.
Well, thank you so much for that. Okay, now questions. Who can start us off? I think we have a microphone. This is a fantastic panel of real experts, so it's an opportunity for you to really unleash them. Any thoughts? Great.
My name is Maria. I'm an international student at Rosenbaum, and I'd like to raise the issue of diversity of international students. Like, we are really diverse. We are flexible. Most of us speak many languages, but we face bias when we are looking for a job, when we want to get into the law industry in New York. So what are your thoughts about international students? And because this issue is not raised as LGBT or other, or people of color, so we are also facing diversity issues. And what are your thoughts about it?
Jim, why don't you take that as someone who hires, you have 300 lawyers working for you, so.
Absolutely right. Let's see, so, the first thing I would say is I actually think international experience is a strong positive all the time. I myself have lived outside of the U.S. for 5 years, and when you're outside of your home country and you're looking back, you learn more about yourself than you ever thought possible. And I recognize that you're in the same position that I put myself in, and so I actually think it's a plus. And then if you have a job like we have big global jobs or jobs that have the potential to be global, to be able to appreciate the differences between legal systems, the difference between corporate environments, the difference between legal departments that hire employment law firms in the UK and the US, but in the UK it's done by HR departments. Knowing those kind of business differences is a benefit. And so from my point of view, it's actually a positive. So your resume for me would be at least as appealing as an American only resume, if not more.
So is it something to promote on your resume then, the notion of languages and
I think so. In
diverse
fact,
experience?
I was an economics and English major in college, and if I could do it all over again, I'd be a Spanish and Chinese major, because those are real tools I could have taken into my job, the legal job, and delivered, come with tools, because it's hard to learn something, way back when, but those are the kind of things I think are very important. So multiple language skills is a thing I think is fantastic advantage for sure.
So in terms of the hiring at Pepsi, is it the same case? You love the international
Absolutely.
students?
Absolutely. And we're in over 200 countries around the world. Half of our business is outside of the United States. That is talent that we seek, that we want, that we need. Absolutely.
Okay, so it sounds like you should talk it up. Any other questions? All right, well, I have another question. Oh, sorry. Oh, we have a hand over here.
Hi, this is a question for, more for Tony, because you mentioned this, but Jim, can't see you. But we actually work together, so it's not really fair to ask Jim. This is Deirdre Heichel from Wilkie Farr. Tony, you were talking about diversity as being one of the metrics when you look at value, you look at excellence, and you look at diversity. And you talked about looking at the firm picture overall. So what I'm curious about is how does it work if you have, for example, a diverse team, you have a partner who is a woman or who is a minority and is in there, wants to make a pitch, leading a team, and maybe their firm is lagging in the diversity metrics. I'm just curious how that works if you have sort of one or the other. Or perhaps you have a firm with great diverse metrics and they put a, let's call it a traditional team in front of you. How does that balance out?
It is the facts and circumstances test, right? I think you actually do have to look at each firm. I think the metrics only are the beginning of the inquiry, right? That gives you a very rough sense of what a firm is doing. But then you actually have to engage in some conversation with managing partner, with the relationship partner, which we do. I'm interested in knowing what the recruitment plan is for the next year or two. I'm interested in knowing what the rest of the firm looks like, and we ask those questions actually. So, I do think it does depend on sort of the facts and circumstances of each individual engagement. I wouldn't, neither of those situations that you described would necessarily nix or guarantee a firm's engagement with us.
That was a tough question. By the way, on your question, the only other thing I'd add is a sensitivity to local culture is the other thing that we don't get when we all grew up in some place around here, and that the reason I mention that is the issue we're talking about, diversity. This is not universally a value. And as you become more global, you must see this. People don't all want to hear about it. And some of you, they may say the right things when you're there, but when you leave, they may say something else. And that's a real challenge, particularly when they're responsible locally for P&Ls, and this may cost them money in their minds. But having a lawyer that is sensitive to what's really going on, I think, is a helpful thing. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Natalie Holder, and I'm from Quest Diversity. And I think that you asked a really great question earlier about what are firms willing to do if you actually do meet those diversity goals and have really great metrics. I'm also interested in hearing about the opposite side of that question. What are firms willing to do if they're not, if the law firms are not willing or have not been able to meet those goals? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the decisions that you've made to no longer work with firms if you found that they did not meet your goals and diversity metrics?
Jim? Have you
Well,
turned?
it's another very good and tough question. Not to steal from Tony, but it is a facts and circumstances kind of situation. If you, I'm in the industry, the insurance brokerage industry, so already I've narrowed down my selection of outside counsel to a relatively tiny group of firms. And maybe it's incumbent upon me to generate more firms that could do that in the long run, and I'll take that point. But if it's a generic action, like a change in the tax laws in the U.S., your selection of counsel is much wider. In the top part, it's hard to apply diversity because you have to go with the limited available choices and encourage other firms to develop that expertise. But in the situation where you do have a choice, I don't think you can make it the only difference, but I think it's part of the conversation. So, for example, with employment law, we've tilted our work as a result of that. That'd be the best example. I don't want to pick out obviously firms or individuals, but we've seen people who were committed to the call to action from which is an old document now, 1999, I think, as I recall. Where firms committed to do this kind of hiring thing, but it's from a practical point of view, it's only available in limited circumstances where the resources are interchangeable.
Well, thank you. We have 1 minute left, and I'm just going to go down the row for a prediction. Even though we talk about, we've been talking about this, you just mentioned a document from 1999 when this stuff was being discussed. Here we are in 2015. Let's give it 2025, Ellen. How, with the surge of women and other groups coming out through law schools, with this discussion really sort of having an acceleration thanks to everything from social media to the global business framework, all of these kinds of things, where are we going to be in 5 and 10 years on this, do you think?
That's a really hard question. I don't know that I really have a forecast of that. I think that, my message would be that I think each one of us individually are in positions to make a difference. And I think, having done this for a long time, you can get to a place to say, it's intractable. And people are always citing statistics for me about it's 17% of women who are partners, and African Americans, it's even less. And it's just, the needle hasn't moved. But I think that's sort of a defeatist point. That I think the statistics will evolve. I've certainly seen it in my own firm. But I would really urge everyone, it's sort of a each one, teach one kind of approach, that I think we can be impactful as individuals. And I think particularly for folks who are junior to me and to us, that it's really important to reach out and reach back. And in my particular case, to not scare everyone away. I have so many young women lawyers who say, I don't want your life. I'm sure it was great for you, but it's not, sort of what they're after. But I also think that the other thing that each of us can do as we reach sort of leadership levels is to talk about the good in what we're doing and how much we enjoy it and what a great profession it is, because I think there's a lot of complaining that scares a lot of very talented people away, even at entry levels. So that's part of kind of our owning it too.
Better statistics, I'm an optimist. More conversations like this one with bigger audiences, and a 50% increase over where we are now.
50%? Oh, I love the data. The data.
There's no accountability for getting it wrong.
I would say this. We haven't had time to mention that the legal profession, the legal industry, has been under intense strain.
Right.
Very competitive. The change is faster than we've ever seen, and that's going to continue. That means two things. One's bad and one's good. The bad is that when people are under financial pressure, their real character shows. And a lot of firms have not been thinking too much about their values, and they've been thinking about staying in business, and they forget about a lot of these things. So I think the cream will rise, and I think those firms will be rewarded. Second thing is that particularly for women and others who have maybe lifestyles that don't want to be like ours, I think there's going to be more choices. I think what's occurring with contract lawyers, temporary lawyers, and all kinds of other alternatives that are filling the gap of the need for something other than the fixed costs of large, giant law firms. You're going to be able to set your hours a little better, and there's going to be a lot more working from home. So I think that's a positive trend for a lot of people.
Tony?
I guess there are three things to think of. One is as the country becomes, specifically the United States, becomes more diverse in its population, the war for talent intensifies. I think, I'm an optimist, I think things get better. I think the line between what is good for diversity and what is good for an entity's, an enterprise's bottom line, I think that line becomes less and less distinct.
That's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, and thanks very much to our panelists.